Welcome to the Property Podcast, the home of news and debate about building long-term wealth from property investment for beginners and experts alike. And now for your hosts, a host so indispensable, we've packed a spare. It's Rob and Rob.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. We're at episode 10. We've made double figures. I'm Rob Bence, as always, and as always with me is Rob Dix. Good morning, Rob. How are you today?
Morning, Rob. Really good, thank you. How's things with you?
I'm superb, thank you very much. Rob, what have we got coming up today?
Well, we've got a great episode, as always. We are going to start off by revealing the best value places to live in the UK. And then our topic of the week this week, buy-to-let versus buy-to-sell. We talk about buy-to-let the majority of the time, but buy-to-sell could be a great strategy for helping you to reach your goals, depending on what your goals are, of course. We're going to be running through the pros and the cons of each, and then we're going to finish off by talking about a productivity hack that we've both implemented that we reckon will help you to get dramatically more done each day.
Yeah, we were talking about that before we started recording, and Rob's pretty geeky on this one, so
oh yeah,
as you would expect. So stick around, listen up for that one, because you certainly will improve your productivity if you use this hack. So, as always, we like to start off the show by thanking you, our loyal listeners. And a round of applause for the following, because we've had some more 5-star reviews, Rob. First up, The Property Fox. This podcast offers some very good advice to someone like me starting out. I look forward to subsequent podcasts and the advice I gain from them. Keep up the good work, Rob and Rob. AWJ says, a worthwhile podcast with UK content. Good up-to-date UK content for people interested in property. Niall says, just listen to your first podcast. Looking forward to catching up on them all. Great start. Thank you very much. And Rufonso, great name, says, great podcast. This is thought-provoking and informative. I look forward to following this as it develops and I can develop my business. Great reviews. Thank you very, very much. And as always, if you're enjoying the show, we don't take your support for granted, but we'd love it if you could leave us a review, because iTunes really appreciates it when we get reviews and bumps us up the charts. So to help other people find us, please keep leaving reviews. We really do appreciate it. And some of the words we've had over the last few weeks have been fantastic. So keep up the work, guys. We thank you for leaving reviews. Please continue to do so.
Please do. All right, well, let's get moving on. Rob, what have you been up to this week?
Well, besides lots of client meetings, which I always enjoy, one of them particularly went on for 2.5 hours, and I normally schedule 2 hours to be safe, but they had so many great questions that just kept ongoing, so, but no complaints. It was really enjoyable. I also spoke to a reporter from the Investor Chronicle, which is owned by the Financial Times this week. He called me up and got in touch because he found an article I wrote on student pods over a year ago. And I sort of gave a bit of a caution on them, that you may want to avoid them, or certainly I gave the reasons why we don't sell them at RMP Property. Even though their commissions on them are fantastic, we don't believe in them. So I put an article together and he stumbled across it, as you do, when he's doing some research. And subsequently, there's also been a bit of a thread on property tribes recently, which is really gaining momentum, where people are coming out the woodwork saying, well, I've lost money on this, or I've not had everything delivered that I was supposed to, or I'm not getting the returns I was expecting. So I'll link to the article I wrote, and I'll link to the thread on property tribes as well, which is very interesting. But when that article comes out, I'll certainly let everyone know so you can go and have a look. That was an interesting conversation. What have you been up to, Rob?
Well, I'm still in Madrid this week, and I've been doing a bit of goal setting, actually. We bang on about goals the whole time, and I haven't really revisited mine for quite a while, so I've been kind of doing a bit of thinking about my strategy and doing a bit of planning and geeking out over that, and kind of preparing to have a couple of conversations with my broker and people like that about what my next moves are going to be. I've also been reading a really great book called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He's a guy who kind of saw the financial crash coming and made a lot of money in the process, and then he wrote a book called Black Swan, which became quite well known. And it's a really huge book full of massive ideas that makes you think about a lot of things in life very differently. And there are some real lessons for property investment in there around how you can position yourself to benefit from the upside of uncertainty and be less vulnerable to changes in the market and all that kind of thing. So at some point when I've fully worked it all out in my mind, I'm going to be doing a blog post that sums some of that stuff up. I found it really interesting to get some kind of new ideas for property investment from a book that really had nothing to do with it. But it's just nice to kind of take lessons and extrapolate.
That's going on my to-read list even. It sounds like a good book. I heard the guys on Lifestyle Business Podcast talking about that book too.
Clear your diary for the next couple of weeks because it's bloody long. but it's worth it. It's really, really interesting.
Great. Well, we'll link to that in the show notes. If anybody wants to get a copy, you can go to our show notes, which of course will be the Property Podcast /10. That, along with the other articles we'll mention today, you'll be able to find.
Well, let's get moving on to the news this week then, shall we?
Well, interesting article, because we could go for the main sort of headlines. They can be a little dull, and you've probably already heard about them. So if we can dig out a unique story, we like to do so. And this one's quite unique. It's an article that was put together by the Telegraph, and it was looking at areas that offer the best value to live. So how they've done it is they've looked at the education levels in the area, the crime rate, and then looked at property prices. They've compared them all together and trying to find the best value areas to achieve the perfect living environment. It threw up some interesting data. What I found particularly interesting is one area that can be ranked really highly can be neighbouring an area that's ranked really low. For an example, South Northamptonshire was 2 out of 346, so ranked very, very well. But Northampton was 298 out of 346, which is obviously next door. So if you're in a good area, it doesn't mean that the person down the road necessarily is. And of course, you always look to where you've lived or where you're currently living. So I used to live on a place called the Wirral for a long proportion of my life, and that's 8 out of 346. So that was quite interesting. And St Albans, which I regularly bang on about, even though the property prices are very high there compared to some other areas, that also ranked really well. I think that came in the top 20. So it's really good. It's really interesting. We'll link to it in the show notes, but it's certainly worth having a look and checking out your area and see how it's doing.
What I found really interesting about it is it kind of ties into the fundamentals that we were talking about in episode 6 on the topic of hotspots, because a lot of the areas in there seem to tick the box for transport links because they're close to big centres of employment, they're near good schools, crime is low. It's all that kind of fundamental stuff. And because they're particularly talking about families in this survey, it means that these could be areas to look at if your strategy calls for family tenants who tend to stay for a long time, because obviously they're areas that are in demand, and maybe there's a potential for capital growth if they are relatively cheap compared to other areas. But it just goes to show that people want to live where the fundamentals are strong. So it's just the same old really. It's another way of looking at the same topic. Let's get moving on to our topic of the week, which this week sees us comparing buy-to-let versus buy-to-sell. Buy-to-let doesn't need much of an introduction. It's what we talk about the whole time, which is buying a property, making money on it every month, seeing its value go up over time, and then you can either sell it on for a big profit way into the future, or you can just hang on to it, see the money for it forever, let the money pay for your pension, then pass it on to your kids. As you can tell, we're big fans of that approach. But then there's also buying to sell, which is in complete contrast, where you'll buy something purely with the view that you want to sell it on for profit almost immediately. A few years ago, that could have been buying something of someone who needed to sell quickly for a discount to what it was really worth, then immediately selling it on to someone else to make a bit of money. Nowadays, that's not so easy for various reasons. It now pretty much involves adding value in some way, buying a property and extending it or refurbing it or doing something that means that it's going to command more money. For example, you might buy a property for $100,000, spend $20,000 on it, and then sell it on for $150,000, pocketing an immediate profit of $30,000. You can already tell that they are very different in terms of the rewards and the risks, so we're just going to run through the pros and cons of each approach. To start with, let's go over buy-to-let quickly, because that's something that listeners will probably be familiar with and we talk about a lot. So let's just talk about the advantages of the buy-to-let approach, Rob.
The first thing I've got on the list here is the cash flow. So one of the pros of investing in buy-to-let or using that as your strategy is that once you've set your property up, you're going to receive a cash flow month in, month out. You always know that there's income coming in as long as your tenants are behaving, and that's not going to change. That's the whole point of the strategy, is that you're going to receive an income from day one onwards. And linked to that, because you're receiving that income, you're then holding on to the asset. rather than letting it go, you're keeping it in your portfolio, you're receiving that income, and then the property values over time will increase, and you've got an asset there as well. A dual bonus, you've got an asset that's paying you. That's why we're attracted to buy-to-let. But there are other things as well that makes it positive as a strategy. What have you got, Rob?
An obvious one is that it's a pretty low-risk approach. If you get your numbers right and you buy properly in the first place, last week we talked about property disasters. We talked about the things that can go wrong, but then we also showed that there's some fairly simple stuff you can do to mitigate that risk. So all in all, you've got a property, if you buy it at a good price, you've got tenants paying your rent, there's not a whole lot that can go wrong with it over the long term. So it's a low risk type of investment, and it also can be a low effort investment if you want it to be. Some people enjoy being hands-on and tending to repairs themselves and having interaction with the tenants. But if you want to, you can just buy it, put a managing agent in charge, and forget all about it until the money hits your bank account every month. It's potentially a low-risk and a low-effort investment if you want it to be. They are the pros of buy-to-let, but fans though we are, we have to admit that there are drawbacks as well, of course.
Yeah, of course there are. There's no perfect investment. What are the drawbacks? Well, the first one is there's no quick gains in buy-to-let. It's not a get-rich-quick strategy. Although some people will tell you differently, it really isn't. So it's all about the long term. If you've got a sensible approach and you set your portfolio up the right way, over the long term, you can do very well. But a drawback is, I suppose, if you see it that way, is that you're not going to get rich quick from it. That's something to consider. The other thing is you may have possible tenant issues because you hold on to the property. From time to time, there's a chance that, you may have some tenant issues, whether they're misbehaving or they're having some problems in general. Now, I'll refer back to the podcast we've just done recently, the Property Disasters podcast, so you can learn how to avoid or potentially avoid those things going wrong. Even if you put the measures in place to prevent it, there's no 100% guarantee that you'll never get tenant issues. So you can drastically reduce your chances, but still something may happen. So that's something you have to consider when you do buy-to-let as a strategy.
Related to tenant issues, I suppose, are long-term maintenance issues. If you hold a property for long enough, things will go wrong. The expensive one is boilers, I suppose. Boilers will blow up every so often and it costs you money. But then there's just things like over the years, there's the potential for damp, there's the potential for needing a rewire, there's all kinds of stuff. And even just holding on to it for a long time, every so many years, the carpets will need replacing, the kitchen will need replacing. That just means that there are going to be costs. You can factor them in, of course, but you just never know when a maintenance issue is going to crop up, including unexpected ones like the roof suddenly springing a leak or something. As well as that, because it's a long-term thing, you are potentially going to end up having cash tied up in the property. There are ways around this. You can buy in certain ways, which maybe we'll talk about in future podcasts, where you can avoid ending up with your cash tied up. But in theory, at least, even if you're buying with a mortgage, you're going to have to fund about 25% of the purchase price in cash, and that's cash that you're potentially not going to be able to get out. If you've only got enough money to put into one property, once you've bought it, you're a bit stuck and you can't go on and buy any more. Like we say, there are ways around it. It's basically a cash-intensive style of investing. They are the pros and the cons of buy-to-let. So let's move on to talking about buy-to-sell. And Rob, maybe you could talk about the benefits of that approach.
Of course. Now, as we said at the top of the show, neither of us do this strategy. The queen of this strategy, of course, is Sarah Beanie. Refer back to her if you want the expert's view, but we know enough to give you the pros and cons. The pros, well, you can make large amounts of money from buy-to-sell strategy. If you take a property that you get for a good price that may be distressed in condition, you add value to it, you know the market well, you do the property up, you may be able to sell it for a quick profit. It is possible, and some people do achieve that. So you can make more money much more quickly than buy-to-let in short periods of time. So that's one of the big pluses and probably the biggest reason why people are drawn to buy-to-sell. The other reason is that once you've sold the property, you've washed your hands with it. So you don't have to worry about tenant issues or, the property in 10 years' time needing more work. You've done your job, you've made your money and you've walked away. You sell and you forget. Two real big plus points to the buy-to-sell strategy. However, as you would expect, of course, there are potential cons as well. So, Rob, do you want to have a look at those and what the potential issues are?
One big con, which could be a pro or a con, depending on how you look at it, but it's quite high risk. It's an exciting thing, if exciting is your game. That's why you don't get many TV property programs where someone just buys a house and sits there and watches the rent roll in for 30 years. It's not very exciting to watch. That's why it all tends to be about buying at auction and doing up and selling on and all the rest of it. Personally, I don't like excitement when it comes to property. I like to know exactly what I'm getting into and what my reward is and just sit there. If you're into excitement, that's great. But the fact is, it's a high risk endeavour, and in the current market the risk is around being able to sell it on, because if you've got a property and you've done whatever you're going to do to it and then you can't find a buyer for it, then you're stuck there with an empty property that you don't want to tenant because someone could buy it at any minute. You put all this money into it, you've got your money tied up, and you're paying the interest on your mortgage or your bridging or whatever else. You've got all these fees that are coming out and there's nothing you can do about it. That's one risk. There's also, of course, the risk that the work that you're planning to do to it is a little bit tougher than you first thought. Refurbs are not easy at all if you're not experienced. It's easy to think, oh yeah, I'll just go in and I'll do this and I'll move this wall, I'll do this, that and the other. But when you start stripping things away, you can find more problems that you weren't aware of that are going to eat into your profit and could easily tip you into a loss if you get all these extra costs that you weren't bargaining for. There's also the problem, if you see it as such, that you're not holding on to an asset. So you've bought a property that, if you kept hold of it, would go up in value over the years and would provide you with an income, but you don't have that. So you've passed that on to someone else and you're back to where you started, hopefully with a few quid more in your pocket. And related to that, it's the cash flow thing. The property is not going to be providing you with a monthly income for years to come. You're going to get money in your pocket now, which is great, but you get that money, you pay tax on it, then whatever's left, you've got to start doing it all again. If buy to sell is all you do, it means that your cash flow is pretty lumpy. You've got to make an effort, and it's not the kind of thing where you can just sit back. I'm worried that I've listed too many cons now, Rob. I've not made this as balanced as we should have done, perhaps.
I'm going to probably add to it, but then I'll try and balance it out afterwards. Now, the lovely Sarah Beanie.
Big fans.
We do love her. The thing you have to remember with her show is that they pack in a whole lifetime of the journey within an hour. When you're sitting at home in your nice warm house and you're watching people go through the stress and the trauma and then hopefully at the end, the victory of the profit they've made, it's all done within 60 minutes. When you do it, and if you've never done this before, then it's going to take a lot longer than 60 minutes. But I know that sounds obvious, but you kind of forget how much work you do need to put into it. So just remember that it's not something to be taken upon lightly. And I've got a great example of this. I've got a client who wasn't a client at first, and he sort of spoke to me some advice. He went away to do refurbs, never done them before, and he got a bulk deal on a load of kitchens. And I think he got 7 or 8, and he bought them in bulk, and he got a cracking deal. And he did his first refurb, and it took so much time and effort, he just thought, never again. And he flipped to buy to let. He's now got 7 kitchens sitting in his garage, and his wife is not the happiest lady because all the garage space is taken up by unused kitchens. So if it's for you, I know the people who do execute this strategy well, they absolutely love what they do. If you're going to do it, make sure, as with any investment strategy, you put your research in, you make sure it's the right strategy for you to hit your goals. And it can be an effective strategy. It's not to say buy-to-let is the way to go for everyone. It's not. So that's why we wanted to talk to buy-to-sell. You can make good money from it, but there are risks, there are downsides. So just weigh it all up when you're making your decision on what to do.
Yeah, I think the key thing to be aware of is that you just can't be motivated purely by greed. You can't just go, oh, here's the opportunity to make 20 grand really quickly, because it is more difficult and it's more hard work than it looks. There's a lady I've just spoken to for my other podcast who's been doing refurbs for 30 years and she absolutely loves doing it, and she's got it down to a fine art. She's got very minimal risk now because she's kind of seen everything and she can foresee all the problems before they come up. And so it can be a brilliant strategy. It's just not something to dive into thinking you can make a few quid quickly. And hopefully that kind of view isn't as prevalent as it was in the peak of all the housing mania. Basically, you've just got to have a plan B. If you're buying to sell and you just need to be aware that if you can't sell it on, then you might have to make the numbers work for buy-to-let instead and end up holding on to it instead. It's good to be aware of all the different ways of doing things. So if the deal comes up and it doesn't work for your primary strategy, you can kind of look at it, oh yeah, maybe I can just buy it and sell it on if you're willing to take on the risk. But as you say, Rob, it just depends on your goals. You've got to have a plan in place to be able to assess whether any particular strategy will get you there.
I think you've summed it up perfectly, Rob, because as you said then, the lady you interviewed has been doing it for 30 years. So her mindset, her motivation isn't get rich quick. So I think if you go into buy to sell strategy with a get rich quick mindset, you're probably going to fail. You need to look at this as a long-term thing. Even if you can make large sums of cash in short periods, if you go for the quick wins, you're probably going to be the person who falls flat on their face, unfortunately. The people who seem to lose their money the quickest in property are the people who are trying to make the money the quickest. You can make great money, but you just need a sensible approach.
Well, we'd love to hear your experiences with this. So if you've got a firm view about whether you prefer buy-to-let or buy-to-sell, or if you've predominantly used one and you've had a dabble with the other and you want to let us know how it went, we'd love to hear how it's worked out for you. So do leave us a comment. You can go over to our blog at thepropertypodcast.com, leave a comment under the show notes for this episode, and we'd love to hear your discussion and we could read out any comments in future episodes.
So, resource of the week, and I know from your comments that this is a popular part of the show, so we don't want to let you down, so I think we've got a good one for you again. This week, it's an app for the iPhone or the iPad. Now, I use this on my iPad. It's really good. It's called the 3030 app. That's the 3030 app. Of course, we'll link to it in the show notes. So go to thepropertypodcast.com/10. That's number 10. And you can see the app there. But this app's really good. Okay, so let me explain how it works. What you do is you list your tasks. And you list them in the order you'd like to tackle them. And when you list them, you allocate a time you'd like to dedicate to that task. Now, if you're anything like me, you'll set your to-do list up and then suddenly you'll start working through it and then a distraction will come in. Whether it's an email, a phone call, somebody wants to talk to you. It could be one of 100 things. You can easily get distracted. The great thing about this app is it really keeps you focused. If you've allocated a certain time frame to a task and that task is ticking away in front of you, it's almost, you see it as a challenge to make sure it's complete. And actually what I do is if I complete it earlier, give myself the extra minutes as a little break to do the other bits and pieces I need to do, or probably than not, get a cup of tea. So it's a great app. Have a look. It's really useful. I believe it's still free. There are some extras you can pay for, but the core app is free. So have a look on the iTunes store. Really useful. I use it a lot. It's a great tool.
I'm not an iPhone user, but I'm feeling a bit jealous now because I've just been looking at the site for the app. It does look really, really great. There is similar stuff available for Android. I've got one called Clockwork Tomato, which achieves roughly the same thing, but it doesn't look like it's got as many features and it doesn't look like it's as pretty either. Essentially, what this app and apps like it allow you to do is use something which is called the Pomodoro technique, which I'm a bit obsessed with, and it basically is all about focusing on one task, because multitasking really is a myth. It's not possible to multitask and do loads of things at once and be really effective. You can get so much more if you just sequentially do one thing, then the next, then the next. And the idea with the Pomodoro technique is you set the timer for 25 minutes, you do one task for 25 minutes, and then you give yourself 5 minutes off to recover and take a walk around, do whatever you want, and then 25 minutes back on that task or the next task, and keep going like that. By sort of seeing the clock ticking down, it really makes you realize that you're meant to be doing one thing. You focus on that thing, you put your phone on silent, shut down your emails and whatever else, and you'd be absolutely amazed with how much you can get in 25 minutes if you just do that one thing. And this app is just a way of helping you to do that, really. The takeaway from all this is whether you use technology to enable it or not, focus is a really, really powerful thing. We were talking just before the show about how you can kind of get distracted and you can be browsing Rightmove for half an hour before you even realise you've done it. So that's a real pitfall of doing a job that you love. But am I working right now or is this play? By timing it and focusing it, you can kind of help to mitigate against some of that temptation.
Rob's put a great blog together on the Pomodoro technique as well. And I know a lot of successful people who I consider successful people who use that technique. So we'll link to that blog in the show notes as well. We'll link to the app. We'll link to the app in the Android store as well if you haven't got an iPhone. But go and download it. go and try the technique out, because I'm convinced it'll make a big difference to your day-to-day activities in life. So have a look, download it, and let us know how you get on.
Rob, I think the show's been running for about 25 minutes, so we should give people a break if we're going to be doing the Pomodoro method. That was the worst link I've ever done.
No, I was quite impressed with that, Rob.
That does wrap it up for this week's show. Again, thank you very much for listening. Do leave us a review on iTunes if you enjoyed it. Let us know what you think, anything that you've been able to use, anything that you'd like us to talk about in future. The reviews are really helpful in helping other people to find the show, so please do go ahead and do that if you enjoyed the show. And then next week, we're going to be talking about how to build your property team.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that episode. Property investment's not just one aspect. You shouldn't be relying on just one person to help you. You can build a team of people who can help you accelerate your success. So next week, we're going to cover how we've set up our teams. So we're going to give you direct examples of what we've done to build our teams around us, so you can then go and replicate that and be successful building your own, and which therefore should set you on your way to success.
Great stuff. All right, we'll look forward to that, and we'll see you all next week.
Right, we're due our 5-minute break, Rob. Let's go. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Property Podcast. Don't forget to check out the show notes and join the mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.